me remind you where we have left off in the last class. When we are trying to study the molecules of life, these are the critical molecules which you will came to know sooner or later, one way or another, about different molecules which are contributing in creating and keeping the balance of life. Okay, so here we go. Everything is set. The molecules of life which we were trying to study. Number one, water. Why it is important? Because it's a wonderful, wonderful solvent. And I tried to explain that why that is. Number two, the carbohydrates. Number three, the lipids. And number four, the proteins. And now I want to introduce about the nucleic acid. And I tried to hold myself in my last class about the nucleic acid because I wanted to talk on that topic in detail. The important things which we have already studied, that about proteins made up of amino acids. There are 20 different amino acids. They make thousands of different types of proteins, and those proteins are responsible in making our structures as well as in energy production. And protein is a functional stuff. I mean, it's a functional molecule. Life executes its functions with the help of proteins. So no protein, no life. And most importantly, if you remember, the enzymes. This term is very important. Enzymes are biocatalysts. They are catalysts. So in the presence of a catalyst, a slow-moving chemical reactions attains a faster speed, it increases its rate of reaction. So all the metabolic chemical reactions which are going on in our body, they require an enzyme to execute in an efficient way to sustain life. So without enzyme, no metabolism, no chemical reactions, no life. It is that much important. Then we try to understand the concept of carbohydrate. They are made up of sugars. And one of the name of that sugar is glucose. You might recall yourself the term glucose. Glucose is one of the unit which merge together to make a big molecule called carbohydrates. They are source of energy. They produce cellular structures as well. Some carbohydrates are simple. They are just made up of small units of glucose and other monomers, smaller monomers. Some carbohydrates are very big and they are made up not only of carbohydrates, but also they are present together with the other molecules of life. Just for your reminder, if a carbohydrate is chemically linked with a protein, it is called as glycoprotein. If a carbohydrate is linked with a lipid, it is called glycolipid. Carbohydrates, since it's a storage, it's an energy molecule. So when our body generates carbohydrates, you know from where we can generate carbohydrates, we get those carbohydrates from other sources, from outer sources, by eating. So the eating gives us the macromolecules, the molecules of life, and we digest and convert those big molecules into simpler ones. We convert carbohydrates into glucose, and then that glucose is then assimilated into our bodies, into our cellular system. And then we use those glucose to produce energy to execute our functions. And if the energy is not required or the glucose is in abundance, we use them, we merge them, and then we store them into different parts of our body. Two major places where we store the glucose. Number one, muscles, and number two is the liver. Different examples of carbohydrates: starch, cellulose, and etc., etc. And then we try to study the lipids. They do not dissolve in water. They are of two types: fats and oils. Fats are the lipids which are solid at room temperature. Lipids are the oils. Fats are solid at room temperature, while oils are liquid at room temperature. The easier example is like the difference between the ghee and the oil जो हम किचन में इस्तेमाल करते हैं. Vegetable ghee is solid at the room temperature, while oil is a liquid at room temperature. So vegetable ghee is an example of a fat, and oil is an example of oil. Vegetable oil is an example of oil. It's a wonderful source of energy, as well as it is involved in making different important structures. And most important structure is the cell membrane. Each cell membrane is made up of the molecule of lipid. And this is a kind of lipid which is called as phospholipid. There are different types of lipids. One of the lipid is called as phospholipid. It is made up of long organic chain, which is non-polar, and a one head or a polar side, which is polar in nature. So that means this side can be dissolved in water, and this side cannot be dissolved in water. It can only dissolve in a non-polar solvent. When such lipid molecules exist together, they arrange themselves in a bilayer like this. They arrange themselves in a bilayer where the polar heads of the lipid molecules are pointing towards outside. So for example, if this is the cell, this is the outer boundary of the cell, you can guess the outer boundary of the cell. So this is the exterior of the cell. This side is the exterior of the cell, or exoside. Out. This side is the interior of the cell. So cell membrane creates a perfect boundary between the exterior and interior side of the cells by having this double layer of the lipid molecules. And these are phospholipids. They dissolve each other, or they interact with each other using their non-polar long tails, while their polar ends are pointing towards outside. So it is not very simple that how things can go into the cells and how things can come out of the cells, because they have to face this special barrier created by the nature. So if something can dissolve in water, that does not mean it will go through the cell. It can enter into the cell because it has to pass through this barrier, non-polar barrier, and then eventually it can enter into the cell. So that is the structure that is part of the structure of every membrane. So I will teach you in the coming slide, in the coming lectures, that our cell is made up of simple small structures which are called as organelles. And many organelles, they are membranous bounded structures. So their membranes exist in those structures. So whenever an organelle is made up of membrane, that membrane will have that same universal structure. ठीक हो गया? So, and I also tried to teach you about the energy currency molecule ATP. Whenever the energy is produced, remember, whenever, from where? Whether it is from ATP, whether it is from the carbohydrates, or it is produced from the lipids, or it is produced from proteins, or it is produced from any other source, the energy is actually translated and converted into ATP. And then it can be transported and used at other parts of the body. This is a very important argument. The people who use the concept of evolution as an argument for the creation of life, they use this argument that having ATP as a fundamental source of energy across all forms of life we know today, whether that life form is a very small microbe or a life form is as complex as like humans. So they have the same level of same currency molecule, same energy molecule called ATP. So whenever the energy is required, the ATP is hydrolyzed using water. It is broken down and it produces energy, which can be used to execute other reactions. So that's it. And then we ended into the nucleic acid. ये आज का topic है. So here is the cat. I believe this is the cat. This is the human. So if a cell comes from the humans or if a cell comes from the cat, every cell contains a nucleus which enclosed the genetic material. Please मेरे साथ रहिएगा थोड़ी देर के लिए. I want you to have a very clear concept of that DNA stuff. And this is like a fundamental stuff for the life. The difference between humans and the cat is not that we are carrying different type of genetic material. The difference is that the DNA of the humans is different in terms of amount. Remember, in terms of amount, and it is different in terms of the sequence. So if two DNA are different from each other, they can be different from each other in terms of the amount of DNA, and number two, in terms of the sequence of the DNA. When two cells, the cat cell or the human cell, when two cells contains different types of DNA, they execute different types of metabolism, they do different type of things, and that makes them different cells. If two organisms contain different types of cells, that makes them two different organisms. So me and the cat are different from each other since we are carrying a different type of DNA. All the fundamental aspects of life are same. It's only about the different in our DNA. Me and an apple, me and a plant, me and any other life form is different from each other because the difference in our genetic material. And that difference means, I told you, the amount and the sequence. When I said the sequence, that means every DNA is made up of 4 alphabets. Recall your understanding about the proteins. The protein is made up of 20 alphabets. But the DNA is made up of these 4 alphabets called A, T, C, and G. These are the 4, you can say, alphabets of life. Sirf 4 alphabets. These 4 alphabets exist in different numbers and in different sequence and create all possible forms of life. So Zindagi jaisa complicated phenomena, the complex phenomena like life is created out of these 4 letters. Is it amazing? 4 letters से सिर्फ कुदरत ने life जैसी complex form को create किया है. So like the sequence of one part of DNA is like A, T, C, C, G, 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 C, T, A. It may be anything, but it is created out of the 4 alphabets I am talking about. It's created out of the 4 alphabets. So life used these 4 alphabets to create all other versions, every other version of life. Bacteria has the same DNA. Bacteria has the same 4 alphabets. Viruses have the same 4 alphabets. You have the same alphabets, and every other life form has the same alphabets. 4. The A stands for adenine. Bhul jaye to khair hai. This is not the time to remember. T stands for thiamine. I'm just speaking it so it can be recorded and you can recall it. C stands for cytosine, and G stands for guanine. These are the 4 what we call as nitrogenous bases, which connect together to make strands of DNA. वो हमारे एक भाई ने बोला था ना सर strands, वो जो strand of DNA, that strand is made up of these small bits or 4 bits like A, T, C, G. अच्छा अगर आप इसे कंपेयर करें, मेरे कंप्यूटर साइंस वाले हेल्प कर सकते हैं, मेरी इस बारे में इतनी अच्छी अंडरस्टैंडिंग नहीं है. I'm just throwing a brainstorming idea, not for the computer science but everybody else. The computer things which we know today is based on the 2 codes. आपको पता नहीं यूनिकोड पे क्या क्या कहते हैं, कंप्यूटर वालों को पता है. It is called IOS, yes no yes no yes no system, like INO system. ये कंप्यूटर पीपल हमारी मदद कर सकते हैं इसमें. It's like things like yes no yes no, binary. Thank you Wajid. It's like a binary system made up of two codes. Yes no yes no yes no. We can make billions of combinations and programs and algorithms, and whatever we can see in computers today is actually started from that binary system. Now what about life? Life क्या है वाजिद? life क्या है? Life में कितने codes हैं? दो नहीं, चार हैं. Imagine the level of complexity in life as compared to the complexity which we are discovering in binary system. अभी हमने binary system पूरा explore नहीं किया है, artificial intelligence की तरफ जा रहे हैं, आगे जा रहे हैं. But once we have explored the binary system completely, then we might be able to understand the level of complexity present in these four sequence of DNA which are controlling life. That is the special thing about life. एक और चीज जो मैं चाहता हूं आप जान के आपको पता होना चाहिए, जो डीएनए का लफ्जी मतलब जो है, that is called deoxyribonucleic acid. We will study that thing later on, but the name means the deoxyribonucleic acid because it is made up of ribonucleic acid. The genetic material generally called as nucleic acid is called as nucleic acid. I'm almost going to complete the things. It's called nucleic acids. There are two types of nucleic acid. The one is called as DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. The other is called as RNA or ribonucleic acid. The DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, the RNA is a ribonucleic acid. There are very small difference exists with both of them. But when we talk about the DNA, when we talk about the genetic material, properties and programming and all these things, we usually talk about the DNA. DNA is present in the nucleus. DNA is present in the nucleus. I'm concluding things. DNA is present in the nucleus. That spiral stuff is present in the nucleus. Cells execute their functions in the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm, it's outside the nucleus within the cell. It is like the boss is sitting in his office or in her office and controlling the functions of all the people out there. So the nucleic acid lives in the nucleus, and people wonder how that nucleic acid is able to control the things going on within the cells. Cell क्या खाएगा, क्या नहीं खाएगा, बड़ा होगा, छोटा होगा, grow करेगा, नहीं करेगा, whether it will divide or it will not going to divide. All these things are controlled by the DNA. जिसको हम कहते हैं life is controlled by DNA. So that is how it is possible that this molecule is able to control the function of life. Because I told you that functions are executed by proteins. Functions are executed by proteins. So at first stage, DNA creates RNA. In first instance, DNA creates RNA. RNA means ribonucleic acid. Here, this one, RNA, ribonucleic acid. DNA creates RNA. Whatever the sequence of DNA is used will create a definite sequence of RNA, and then that RNA is used to create a specific protein. If a region is used, it will create a type of RNA, and that will create a type of protein, and then protein can execute its function. If a B type of DNA is used, it will create a B type of RNA, and that will create a B type of protein. So whatever the nature or the region of DNA is used, it will create a specific proteins, which means a specific function. So whatever the function the cell want to execute, it will use a specific region of the DNA. This thing is called as central dogma of life. This is called as central dogma of life. This is everything about life in biology. सारी biology को एक जगह पे इकट्ठा करना है. This is the central dogma of life, that how DNA controls the functions of the cells. And we talk about the nucleic acid, and I told you that it is it's made up of nucleotides. And now when you know that monomers, which constitute the DNA, there are four types of monomers. The one is, I told you, the A, the other one is T, and the other one is C, and then the G. It is called as deoxyribonucleic acids. There are two types. One is DNA, or the other is RNA. Now you know the little bit difference between them. They carry information, and this is the thing which we pass to the next generation. They carry messages in the cellular process. I explained DNA produce RNA and RNA produce proteins, and that proteins execute the function. And then DNA directs the synthesis of various types of protein. You should know that thing in detail now. Proteins to hand, then they execute the functions. And DNA is actually, there are two strands of DNA. You can see this is the one strand of DNA. This is the other strand of DNA. Each strand is made up of one nucleotide. और मैंने इसको shortcut किया था आपके लिए. This is called as C. This is cytosine nucleotide. I just summarized this fragment with C. This is called as the T. And this one is called as the A. So these are the fragments and the monomers and the nucleotides which make the strand of the DNA. There are two strands of DNA which runs anti-parallel to each other. Every C binds with the G, every T binds with the A. This is like a law, and we see in detail. So these two strands actually merge, or you can say spiral around each other in this way. And now you can figure out, you should be able to figure out this thing, that these strands are made up of nucleotides. These strands are made up of nucleotides. Here, maybe यहाँ पर C हो, तो यहाँ पर क्या होगा? T होगा. Two